Darren Mitchell stared at the data slate with the kind of stillness that doesn't come from shock, but from trying not to let the universe unravel all at once. I saw it happen. I shouldn't have. No one should have. And if you're watching this, then maybe you're already too deep. Because this isn't a story. It's a crack in reality, and once you hear it, you won't unhear it. Not in your sleep. Not even in the static silence between your thoughts. It started with a question, not spoken out loud, not even written down, just passed like a virus through the tight corridor of one man's stare. A question no one in command dared to ask, not even after what happened to the USS Lexington. We were told it suffered a systems failure during a maneuver run outside Jupiter's shadow, but we knew there was no debris, no signal, no power signature, just nothing. A tactical pilot vanished mid-combat sim, his ship still logged in, the net still in formation, but the pilot gone. Only Darren came back. He walked off that hangar deck cold, like the space outside had seeped into his bones, and said one thing to the attending flight officer before he collapsed. He didn't die. He rewrote it. Nobody knew what that meant, at least not then. They gave him sedatives, buried the logs, and labeled the incident Category Black Human Systems Error. But in my feed, something slipped through. The last 10 seconds of a neural link combat record, supposed to be overwritten, flickered in my peripheral HUD during diagnostics. Not audio, not even visual. A presence, the kind that makes your mind go cold with a truth your brain isn't supposed to process. And then came the baby. 3 weeks after Darren disappeared from his recovery room, no forced entry, no sign of struggle, just a gurney still warm. His sister had a child. She named him Noah, and at exactly 3:12 a.m., while the monitor's red standby light pulsed like a slow heartbeat, the newborn turned his head, straight toward the darkened hallway, and said a name no one had mentioned in years. A name they'd stricken from every archive. He said, Reed Carraway, the pilot who vanished in the Lexington incident, officially KIA, no record of burial, no funeral. His log files were sealed behind 5 layers of fleet command clearance. I know because I tried to access them. And the next day my comms were scrubbed. My smart glass darkened, and I started seeing symbols in the mirror, etched into condensation, like breath from another world spelling something in a language I didn't know I could read. There's more. God, there's more. But this next part, it'll change everything you thought was possible in space combat. Because Reed Carraway didn't vanish. He found something or someone inside the void. He made contact, not with aliens, not with AI, but with something older, something that remembers before war, before physics, and now he's rewriting the battlefield. The first new law he carved into the silence of space was simple, beautiful, terrifying. The first weapon is memory. You want to know the second? Then you need to see what we found in the wreckage of the Erebus, because Reed left a message, and it's not in any language we've ever spoken, but your blood already knows how to read it. The message from the Erebus wasn't just alien, it was impossible. It lingered in the edges of my mind like a whisper caught between breaths, the kind that pricks at the back of your skull, leaving you wondering if you actually heard it, or if your brain's just cracked from too many late shifts and filtered stress. I sat staring at the data feed, watching lines of code twist into shapes that shouldn't exist, all the while feeling like I was unraveling from the inside out. And then it started. The glitches. Soft, almost imperceptible at first. A flicker in the audio, like someone had pressed the rewind button just a little too hard, and instead of voices, I caught fragments of a lullaby. Nothing from the recorded logs, no channel to explain it, just the edge of static that felt like a breath in the dark. A breath I could never quite chase. I rewound, slowed it down, boosted the frequencies. Nothing sane, nothing concrete. Just the feeling that someone was watching from just beyond the reach of the sensors, But here's where it gets darker. My memory began to betray me. Small things at first, a misplaced key, a forgotten appointment. But then, moments in the feed that I should have recognized were blank. Frames that disappeared into black nothingness. Voices that cut out mid-sentence like someone clipped out the parts of a conversation that mattered most. Worse still, I found a hidden recording buried beneath layers of encrypted data. A distorted voice repeating a name I couldn't place over and over. Harper. No metadata, no context. Just the name. That name haunted me because it wasn't mine, but I felt it like a scar under my skin. I thought I was going mad, or worse, losing grip on the reality that had always been my anchor. That's when Harper came in. I met her in the low-lit corner of a dive bar on the outskirts of Kennedy Space Center. Off-duty crew, jittery eyes, the kind of quiet that doesn't just listen, but consumes. She said she'd been following the Lexington incident longer than anyone else in the fleet, that she'd tracked pilots who vanished and reappeared with eyes like they'd seen too much, and that Reed Carraway wasn't the first to rewrite the laws. Her words were sharp, soaked in a kind of desperate clarity that made you want to believe. But Harper was a riddle wrapped in smoke. Her stories shifted each time we met. Sometimes she was a retired intelligence officer, other times just a conspiracy blogger chasing ghosts. She'd show me recordings, videos that dissolved into static, images where faces blurred and reformed like they were made of liquid, voices that didn't match the mouths moving on screen. She'd smile that knowing smile, the one that said she was holding back something terrifying, something that could make you lose your mind if you ever touched it. I wanted to trust her, but every instinct told me to run. Late one night, after another round of conflicting truths and half-spoken confessions, Harper whispered something that broke the fragile thread I was clinging to. What if none of this is real? What if the truth is buried inside your own head, the part you don't want to remember? She didn't mean hallucination or PTSD, though those shadows lurked nearby. She meant something older, something darker, like the way the void between stars feels alive, thick with secrets so vast your mind rejects them. In the days that followed, I started losing chunks of time. Hours vanished without warning, leaving behind a hollow ache like I'd blinked and missed the world spinning away. I'd find myself staring at empty logs I should have edited, emails I swore I never wrote, conversations etched in my mind that Harper vehemently denied ever happening. The line between memory and fabrication blurred, each doubt a knife, twisting deeper. And always there was that name, Harper. Or was it Reed? Or maybe both. Every night my dreams were invaded by fragmented echoes, a baby's voice calling out a name, a pilot's last whisper, a lullaby in a language I didn't know but somehow understood. I would wake soaked in cold sweat, convinced I'd seen something in the dark that wasn't human. Yet come morning, the shadows dissolved into rational doubt. What they don't want you to remember is that the greatest weapon isn't technology, or firepower, or even code. It's the fragility of your own mind. I began to wonder if Reed's disappearance wasn't a breakthrough, but a warning. A signal lost in the madness of war and silence. If the real mystery wasn't in the void outside, but in the void inside, where memories fracture and the past becomes a conspiracy you don't want to piece together. Then Harper vanished. No note, no message, just the slow fading of a name from every record, every digital footprint wiped clean, like she was never there, or like she was never supposed to be. And now, I'm left with the message carved into my brain. The first weapon is memory. But what if memory is the battlefield? What if the war is already inside us, fought with shadows and whispers? I don't know what's real anymore, but I do know this. Someone out there remembers, and they're watching, waiting for the next law to be rewritten. Are you ready to hear the rest? Because once it's out, you can never go back. For weeks, I chased shadows and half-truths, drowning in a sea of fractured memories and ghost signals that teased at the edges of my sanity. Then, like a flicker of dawn breaking through a storm-thick sky, something shifted. It came in the form of an old encrypted transmission buried deep within the Lexington's black box, something so carefully hidden it felt like a heartbeat caught between the pixels of a corrupted file. The file cracked open with the weight of revelation, and for a moment I believed I had found the hidden truth, the key to unlocking everything that had haunted me since Reed Carraway disappeared and Harper became a ghost herself. The transmission wasn't a war code or a battle tactic. It was a confession, a recorded voice trembling with exhaustion and something darker, fear, maybe guilt, explaining what really happened on that mission. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Robert Madsen, a name buried under layers of classified silence, a man who was the Lexington's second in command and who had vanished from all official histories right after the incident. The message revealed a mission breach, a cascade failure not of technology, but of trust. Reed had discovered a covert operation inside Fleet Command, something unspoken and grotesque. Madsen's voice trembled as he described how the ship's systems were hacked not by an external enemy, but by their own people, to erase Reed's very existence, to bury what he knew. The revelation came with a timestamp and coordinates, a place outside the known star maps, where the Lexington had crossed into something that should never have existed, an uncharted void cloaked in silence and darkness. I tracked down the coordinates, piecing together satellite imagery and old logs. What I found wasn't a battlefield, but a memory glitch, a warped fragment of space-time where reality folded in on itself like a dying star's final gasp. It was here that Reed's ship had vanished, swallowed not by enemy fire, but by something deeper, something watching from the shadows of the void, waiting for the right mind to fracture. The files hinted at a psychological contagion, an infection of the mind itself, passed silently through whispers and broken data streams, a phenomenon the fleet quietly labeled the silent drift. It explained the memory loss, the missing, ours the strange voices in the static. I was ready to believe the mystery was solved, that the silence was finally broken. I reached out to old contacts, cross-referenced survivors who had brushed too close to this phenomenon, and lived to tell fragmented tales of hallucinations so vivid they blurred the line between nightmare and reality. The pieces seemed to fit. Reed wasn't dead. He was lost in the drift, caught in a liminal space between dimensions, his mind fighting to stay tethered while the void reached in like a cold hand to rewrite his memories. Harper's disappearance suddenly made sense too. She had either been consumed by the same contagion or had slipped away to protect whatever truth she carried. But then came the detail that shattered everything. A diary entry buried in an old, dust-covered folder labeled Project Marrow, a clandestine experiment from decades earlier, long before the Lexington incident. The entry was dated 30 years prior, and written by a technician who had worked on early neural interface prototypes for the fleet's experimental pilots. The words chilled me like ice down the spine, describing a man who vanished under eerily similar circumstances during a test run, a man named Reed Calloway, with striking parallels to Reed Carraway. The technician wrote of whispered voices, the baby's name, a lullaby in the dark, and most disturbing of all, the man's final words. The first weapon is memory. The past and present were mirroring each other, echoing through time, like a cracked recording stuck on repeat. I realized then that the phenomenon wasn't new. It was a cycle, a dark rhythm lurking beneath the fleet's gleaming surface. Something ancient had been watching from the beginning, weaving its presence through the lives of these men, threading the silent drift into their memories like poison. But what was it? I couldn't name it. It wasn't a creature or an alien, not in any way I could understand. It was a force, psychological, atmospheric, personal. The weight of it pressed against my chest every time I closed my eyes, a cold certainty that whatever it was, it thrived on fear, doubt, and the fragility of the human mind. It had been here long before Reed, long before the Lexington, long before even the Project Marrow experiments. It had been waiting, watching us fracture under pressure, feeding on the hidden truth. We never dared admit that the mind itself could be weaponized, rewritten, and lost. I sat back, staring at the walls of my small apartment, feeling the oppressive quiet seep into my bones. The transmission, the memories, the voices, they all began to twist, warp, become less certain. Had the files been tampered with? Was Masson's confession real, or another layer of the Silence's cruel game? Was Harper ever really there, or just another ghost born of my unraveling mind? My reflection in the window flickered, just for a moment, as if someone else was standing behind me, whispering the name I didn't want to remember. And then, in the corner of the room, the old data slate buzzed to life on its own, displaying single phrase I hadn't seen before. Remember, you're not crazy, they lied to you. The screen flickered again, and the entire story, the Lexington, Reed, Harper, even my own memories, played back in an endless loop, but with subtle changes. Faces blurred, voices shifted, timelines rearranged themselves. Every truth I thought I'd uncovered was a lie. Every certainty fractured like shattered glass. The memory glitch wasn't just a symptom, it was the whole damn disease. And as the loop repeated, I realized the real horror wasn't what had happened to Reed Caraway, or Harper, or the Lexington. It was that none of it had ever been what I thought it was. You need to watch everything, again, because the story you heard, the one you believed, is already unraveling beneath your skin. And the silent watcher, it's still here, watching, waiting, always waiting. The deeper I sank into this labyrinth of fractured memories and impossible truths, the clearer it became. I wasn't alone. What started as a solitary descent into the maddening silence of the silent drift had threaded its way into countless lives, like an unseen current pulling under anyone who dared to pry beneath the surface. They were watching, not just from the shadows of the void outside the fleet sensors, but from within the folds of our own consciousness. Others who had touched this broken edge of reality, whose minds carried scars invisible to the casual observer but etched in coded messages left in places only we could find. At first, the messages were subtle, glitches in transmission, brief flickers of light on screens, strange symbols appearing in data logs where no one had touched them, almost as if a hidden hand was reaching through the layers of digital noise to catch our attention. Patterns emerged, cryptic but deliberate, resembling a form of secret communication designed not for the masses, but for those attuned to the frequency of the drift. I wasn't just a victim. I was a participant in a conversation spanning decades, stretching back before Project Marrow, before the Lexington's final moments, into a time erased from official records. The messages whispered that we were all connected by the same fracture, linked not by location or rank but by something far more intimate. Shared dreams that blurred into waking visions. Flashes of memories that weren't our own, faces and names bleeding through the veil of our own identities. One night, after a fitful sleep, I awoke with a sense of intrusion, a weight pressing down like cold water flooding a cramped hull. My vision swam with fragmented images, a labyrinthine station lost in darkness, faces morphing between the known and the alien, a name repeated like a chant in a language I could almost understand. I reached for the slate beside my bed and found a new file waiting. No sender, no timestamp, just a single frame of static breaking into a faint outline of a symbol. A twisted, infinite loop that I recognized from a fleeting moment in the Lexington's corrupted logs. I wasn't alone, and neither were the others who had seen this symbol. They were out there, somewhere in the vast expanse of space and the recesses of human memory, watching as I watched, listening as I listened, bound by a dread. Neither fully conscious nor entirely imagined. The more I tried to grasp it, the more the line between observer and observed began to blur, collapsing under the weight of a truth that felt both deeply personal and terrifyingly vast. The idea of identity itself started to unravel. What did It mean to be when your memories could be rewritten, your thoughts infiltrated, your very self overwritten by a force unseen yet unmistakably present? It was then that I began receiving transmissions from a third perspective, a voice unfiltered by the noise and distortion that plagued my own experiences. This observer spoke with a calm, unsettling clarity, offering fragments of insight that cut through the confusion like a scalpel. They claimed to have witnessed the birth of the drift, to have documented the earliest experiments that the fleet and the government never released to the public. Found footage from 20 years ago, they said, footage that showed the first signs of the silent drift, the first pilots to lose themselves in the void's unrelenting grip. But this voice was no ally. There was an undercurrent of something else, something detached, clinical, as if the observer was less a person and more a conduit for something beyond comprehension. Their messages weren't comforting. They were warnings riddled with half-truths and questions that made me doubt everything. They insisted that the drift wasn't just a phenomenon, but a living force, an ancient intelligence feeding on memory, identity, control. A presence that had been shaping our thoughts, our histories, our realities long before we even realized. "You were right all along," the voice said in a message that echoed through my mind like a mantra. "But the truth you seek is not the truth you will find. They have been here since before the stars were charted, rewriting not just history, but the very essence of who you are." The realization sank in with a crushing weight. The silent watcher, the one feeding on fear and memory, was not confined to the void outside the fleet or the hidden corners of classified files. It was inside us, in our doubts, our dreams, the spaces between what we remember and what we are. Told to forget. It manipulated the narratives, the footage, the very fabric of our consciousness, keeping us trapped in a cycle of fragmented truths and manufactured realities. Every revelation felt like a trap laid for those who dared to look too closely. Every memory a possible illusion crafted by a force that reveled in uncertainty. The conspiracy was no longer just a story. It was a living, breathing entity that consumed identity itself, blurring the line between reality and nightmare, observer and observed, self and other. As I pieced together these fragments, feeling the silent weight of countless eyes watching through the cracks in space and mind, I realized the story isn't mine alone. It's ours. A collective nightmare whispered across time and space, coded in symbols and shared dreams that only we can decode. The watcher waits patiently, its gaze heavy and unyielding, knowing that every question asked brings us closer to a truth that could unravel us completely. And as this message ends, I can feel it pulling at the edges of my mind again, a gentle but relentless tug that promises there is more, always more, waiting just beyond the veil. The question isn't whether you're part of this, but how deep you want to go, because the story you thought you were watching is just the beginning. And the watcher? It's never stopped watching. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound I'd ever known. It wasn't the kind of silence that wraps itself around you like a blanket. It was the silence that suffocates, the void between heartbeats where time seems to stop, and the weight of everything you've lost and everything you fear crushingly settles in your chest. The truth I'd been chasing, peeling away layer after layer of distortion and betrayal, was no longer about what had happened to Reed Carraway, Harper, or even the Lexington's doomed mission. It was about why it had happened, why the silence had swallowed them whole, why memory had fractured, why identity had become a battlefield where unseen forces wrestled control. The why was the hardest question of all, because it wasn't answered. In logs or transmissions or even in whispered confessions from voices half buried in static. It lived in the raw, trembling core of what it meant to be human. Our desperate need to be seen, to be remembered, to have our stories told and believed. The silent drift wasn't just a cosmic anomaly or a weapon. It was a mirror reflecting the fragility of our existence, the thin veil between self and other, reality and nightmare, sanity and madness. It was a reckoning with the parts of ourselves we hide even from our closest companions, the parts that fear being erased, forgotten, or twisted beyond recognition. I found myself staring into that mirror, not as a soldier or a pilot or even a witness, but as a fractured person trying to reclaim a sense of self that had been stolen piece by piece. The memories that slipped through my fingers were not just glitches. They were fragments of my own story, rewritten by something beyond comprehension, something that thrived on doubt and fear, like a parasite burrowing deeper with every unanswered question. In the quiet of that realization, a painful confession emerged from the depths of my mind, a memory I had fought to suppress, buried beneath layers of denial and fragmented time. I remembered the moment I first heard the lullaby in the static, not from the logs, but from my own mother's voice on an old recording I kept hidden. She had whispered the same name, Harper, as if trying to warn me of something I wasn't ready to face. That lullaby wasn't just a fragment of the past. It was a tether to a pain I'd never fully acknowledged. The loss of connection, the fear of being alone in a universe that felt increasingly hostile and indifferent. The choice before me was agonizing and absolute: to dive fully into the silent drift, to surrender to the unraveling of my mind and possibly become another lost fragment swallowed by the void, or to resist, to hold on to whatever thread of sanity and humanity remained, even if it meant carrying the burden of uncertainty and fear. It was a moment of total vulnerability, where the illusion of control shattered, and I had to confront the terrifying possibility that the truth I sought might not save me, but could very well destroy me. The observer's voice returned. Softer, now not cold and clinical, but almost compassionate, whispering through the noise of my unraveling mind. "You were never meant to find all the answers," it said. "The silence is not a curse, but a choice, a passage through the darkest parts of ourselves where we either break or become something new." And in that moment, as the boundaries between self and shadow dissolved, I understood that this story, our story, was not about a mystery solved or a battle won. It was a terrifying awakening to the rawness of existence itself, the fragile beauty and infinite darkness that define what it means to be human. The silent watcher still waits, still watches, from the edges of memory and space, but it is no longer just an enemy to fear. It is a part of the story we all carry, a reminder that some truths are too immense to hold without breaking, and some memories are gates to worlds we may not be ready to enter. So I choose to keep walking that razor's edge, between what is real and what is whispered, between forgetting and remembering, because to stop is to disappear completely. And as you sit with this, watching the shadows flicker on your screen, ask yourself, how much of your own story is truly yours? Because some dreams aren't meant to be woken from, and some truths don't want to be found. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.